Everyone, and welcome to our November LinkedIn Live. I have a wonderful guest today, Jessica Grossmeier, who is not only an expert on the topic that we're going to be talking about, which is about social connections, which is really appropriate for the holiday that is coming up, really all about connections. But also Jessica happens to be a very dear friend of mine. Jessica, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
So Jessica, I always ask people at the outset where they're coming from, and also to all our guests, if you would go ahead and write in the chat where you're coming from. I'm in San Francisco, and Jessica, where are you?
I am in Gilroy, California, about 90 minutes south of you.
Okay. Well, we're going to be talking today about the topic of social connections, and Jessica is a fabulous guest to have on our show. She's an award-winning researcher with a focus on what works best in workplace well-being. She's been working in in the industry for a long time now. She advises companies and vendors on best practice approaches. She is also speaker. And she's author of Reimagining Workplace Well-Being, Fostering a Culture of Purpose, Connection, and Transcendence. And there's the book. Thank you for holding that up. It's a terrific read. She co-led the Foundation for Social Connection report focused on what organizations can do to support social connection at work. So great person to have. We've got people coming in from, AJ coming in from Huntsville, Alabama, Sabine coming in from France. Bienvenue. It's so nice to have you, Sabine. And again, all of the others that are coming in, please write in the chat where you're coming from. So let's hear first, Jess, a little bit about your story and your focus now on social connections and connection kind of writ large, not only connections with one another, but also connections with what matters most, and kind of making that transition from a more standard workplace well-being and evaluation to now really kind of taking this bigger picture view.
Yeah, so you mentioned in the introduction that I've been doing research for a long time on best practices, and a lot of people are familiar with my work as a researcher. But for a long time, I've been really interested in spiritual well-being. And I was discouraged from pursuing that earlier in my career when I approached my leadership and said, hey, I really want to look into this and how that can be a part of our approaches. And I was discouraged. So in 2021, I took an intentional sabbatical, a year off, to dig into this research. And I came across thousands of studies on workplace spirituality. And I thought, where has this research been all my life? I need to dig into this. And that year of research actually culminated in me writing my book, because I realized there's a lot of guidance here on how we can be incorporating spiritual well-being practices into the workplace. And many organizations are not doing that because they just don't know how to do it. And one of the areas is social connection. And that's what is inspiring our conversation today. But it's also around how do we connect more deeply with ourselves and what we care about. And there's a lot of overlap between connection and purpose, because when you ask people what do they care about, they tend to talk about their relationships.
Yeah, that's really what matters the most in the end. Yeah. So let's dive into our topic today. And one of my favorite studies that's out there is a nearly 85-year study out of Harvard University on longevity. And the researchers there really they've been following Harvard grads, including people like both my parents went to Harvard, as did my grandfather, my great grandfather, my great grandmother, but kind of looking at following these Harvard graduates and what does their life look like upon graduation, and what are those things that matter most? And what they found was that overwhelmingly what matters most is really the response to one question, a two-part question, which is, am I loved and am I loving well? And so compared to all other aspects of well-being, whether we're talking about exercise or healthy eating or career well-being or community well-being or financial well-being, the piece they found that matters the most is social connections. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that study, Jess?
Yeah, I think that study is so fascinating. And, for as long as the research has been going on, we're still not recognizing this. I think more now in the last couple of years, partially because we're beginning to realize the importance of social connection on mental health. But for a long time, this research has existed, helping us to understand how important social connections were. But when it comes to workplace well being, I think a lot of organizations are saying, well, people can get their social connection outside of work. That's not what they come to work to do. And emerging research is now showing no, people want social connection at work as well. We spend all sorts of time there. And, I remember when the Surgeon General created his report on social connection isolation, he talks about how he discovered this for himself because he experienced loneliness in his first stint as Surgeon General. And that really surprised him how lonely and isolated he felt. And so when he had a chance to come back around for his second stint as US Surgeon General, he elevated that not only as a priority for the nation, but as a priority for himself. And he
Hmm.
started to be more intentional about fostering social connection. And when I discovered this research, I've been doing the same thing myself. How can I lean into more quality social connections as part of my work?
Hmm. And it's interesting, kind of that interplay between what we do in work and what we do outside of work. There's been such a strong line between the two, and we have our friends outside of work, and we have our we kind of do our work. And just like there's been a normalization around emotional well-being, and that it's okay to talk about our mental health at work, there really also seems to be a normalizing of making friends at work, and how important that is, and how much, if we're connected at work, we're also more likely to be connected outside of work, and vice versa. I want to talk really quickly just about the study, the report that you just mentioned that the Surgeon General released in May of this year on the epidemic of loneliness. And he cites research such as, if we're lonely, the impact that it has on us impacts us not only on an emotional level, but even on a physical level. And he even cites a study in which it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's not only is loneliness more damaging than we might imagine, but on the flip side, as really demonstrated by the Harvard University study, having social connections is really, really good for us. So talk about the release of this report by the Surgeon General and how that's really changed the conversation around why we need to be socially connected.
Well, there's really two cases for this. One is when we're talking about well-being outcomes, understanding the importance of social connection for well-being and thriving, but there's also a business case. So I'll speak to both. When it comes to our own personal well-being, having strong social connections help us get through the challenges of everyday life. They help us to be more resilient, and they actually can help us prevent burnout because we feel held in a sense when we have these strong relationships. We know we're not in it alone, right? And that can be both at home and at work. It can also help us to be more effective and productive in our work. Other research has found that when we have friends at work, we tend to be more productive. And a lot of employers are hyper focused on productivity right now. But what they don't realize is that when we have friends at work, we're also more likely to take an active interest in common projects, to communicate better with one another, to give people the benefit of a doubt, to evaluate their work and review it more carefully. And we're able to provide better feedback to people in a more compassionate way. So there are a lot of reasons that this is important, not just for our well-being, but also for business.
So having those social connections at home and at work is not only good for us as people, but it is also essential for the bottom line, and also really important for building a high performing team. And
Mhm.
one of the things that you and I talked about in getting ready for this, Jessica, is just that I have experienced, and I know you have experienced this as well, that when we have these conversations with managers and leaders about the importance of not just social connections, but real friends and even best friends at work, and that this is one of the most important aspects to having a high performing team, that we often get an enormous amount of pushback on that. And I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on why there's so much resistance around having these social connections, even having a best friend at work. And again, really quickly, before you respond to that question, I want to remind our listeners, please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll be sure to address that. So again, repeating the question, Jess, if you can just talk a little bit about why do you think there's so much resistance from leaders and managers on this idea of building friendships at work?
Yeah, I think, I can relate to this because as I share in my book, when I was in a senior VP role in an organization that I had worked with for 7 or 8 years, I experienced social isolation and loneliness as a leader. And it was because as I rose through the ranks of leadership in the organization, I began to feel like I had to act like a leader all the time. And our school of thought around leadership has long been around this more authoritarian way of leading. We think about, we need to help people meet their business objectives at any cost. And attending to employee relationships is considered soft. That's the nice to do stuff. What I experienced is that it actually made a profound difference in my ability to lead effectively because I was experiencing loneliness and isolation as part of my job. And research, in fact, shows that when even one single member of your team is experiencing loneliness or isolation, it affects the whole team's performance because people aren't relating to one another. If people are starting to withdraw, then they're not fully engaging the team. And so I think we've started to begin to realize that we need to flip this around and think about how contributing to social connections at work actually helps us to thrive and be more engaged in our work. It helps us to bring more of our ideas and our talents and our gifts to our coworkers and to recognize them in other people. And that's important for team cohesion, performance, all the good things that businesses look for. And so we just need to change our mindset. This isn't soft stuff. There's actually a business case for this. And I know a lot of employers are really focused right now on not just productivity, but employee engagement. When we have those stronger connections at work, it makes us want to go back. It makes us want to lean in to what we're doing and to support one another. So I think we just need to change our mindset about how we think about this. It's not a nice to have, it's actually essential.
It's funny. There was a really fun study that found that high performing teams, one of the things they tend to do is they tend to swear more together. So there's that level of comfort that I'm such good friends with these people that I can kind of let loose. And so talk a little bit about that, how the friendship really helps to fuel that and why that level of comfort matters for productivity and engagement and also quality of work.
Yeah, there's been a lot of pushback on this idea of, well, how do we be more authentic at work? And authenticity at work has to do with, like you said, letting your hair down a little bit, letting people see a little bit more of who we are. And that's scary for people because they're worried that they're not going to be accepted for who they are, warts and all, saucy language and all. And so when people begin to take those risks and bring down some of that guard and to be more authentic with one another, there is fear that comes into that. But when we are met with this embrace and people actually leaning into, oh, I love seeing this side of you, I love understanding more about who you are as a person, it actually it results in a spark of energy between us, and it allows us to say, well, okay, I wasn't rejected there. I'm going to lean in even more and bring even more of what I have. And what we're really doing is we're offering ourselves up as gifts to one another when we can be more authentic.
And again, I think that it's the manager, the team leader who plays such an important role in really normalizing that within the team.
Mhm.
And so do you have any advice for managers/team leaders around what they can be doing to help normalize that kind of full authenticity within the team?
Yeah, well, if people are seeing that leaders are faking it, they're going to
Mm,
see that. And so I think leaders need to actually embrace this idea of, can I really be myself at work? Can I feel comfortable bringing my whole self to work? And I think it can be helpful for organizations to help leaders by forming supportive peer groups. You know, having managers that just meet with other managers to talk about what's hard, what's working, what's not working, and to share their lives and their challenges with one another as managers. Because as a leader, you feel like you're not supposed to bring your challenges or problems to your team members, especially to those that report to you. And so it's important for leaders to surround themselves or to have other people that they can have trusted conversations with. And when they're able to do that, then they're able to recognize the value of that for themselves and to understand, well, what does it look like to really support my team members? What does it look like to elevate a compassionate approach and give people the benefit of the doubt? People are not just doing this because they went to a training or a skills workshop. They're doing this as a result of their own experience. What does it feel like to be cared for and supported? And then how can I turn that around and help my team members to be cared for and supported? Now, I'm not knocking training, because training is very important. And I know, Laura, that you provide a lot of training for managers and supervisors. Understanding the rudiments of how do we build a psychologically safe workplace and have conversations in ways that honor and respect different points of view. How do we have compassionate conversations with team members, especially when things don't go according to plan? What does
yeah.
it look like to give people the benefit of a doubt, even when we have to have a firm conversation about performance? Those are skills that we could all learn.
I think what you're bringing up about this peer to peer between team leaders is so essential, and definitely something that I have seen that has come out of the Managers on the Move workshops that we've done with organizations, like, for example, with organizations like Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota, is that a lot of the managers really teamed up together and even brought their teams together to support one another. So let's define this a little bit further. And Jess, you talk about kind of these three components to social connections. Could you, you talk about it on a structural level, functional level, and a quality level. So help us to better understand what social connections actually means.
Yeah. So Brene Brown, social scientist, describes social connection as the energy that's created when we feel seen, valued, and heard. So, how do we feel seen, valued, and heard at work? It's by addressing these three areas. Structural is what we're most familiar with. How do I create more opportunities for people to connect with one another via text messages or other types of digital communications, virtual meetings, in-person gatherings? So that's all structural. But we can't just do that. We have to also attend to functional and quality aspects of connection. Functional is about the depths of those interactions that we have. Do we have time, and are we given permission to do something other than talk about the task oriented nature of our work? We have an agenda, let's stick to it. There's no room for, talking about what we did on the weekend, for example. So we need to create the space and help people to have the permission to have deeper levels of conversation, maybe even about stuff that has nothing to do with the nature of the agenda that we're meeting about. So we have to create the opportunity for that. And then there's quality. How do we perceive our interactions to be? When we have a conversation with somebody, did that go largely positive or negative? Was it inclusive or exclusive? And so we can teach people skills on how to ensure that when they're communicating and interacting with their employees, that people are more likely to feel heard, encouraged, supported, and included.
And some of those, I mean, talk about that on a kind of more human level, Jess, about, how you can foster that quality, that last piece. What is, and again, thinking about that team leader, what do they need to be thinking about doing in their day-to-day interactions with their team members and even with peers?
Well, I'm going to give an example of something that I've been working on for decades. As soon as I started to lean into how I was showing up at work and interacting with people, one of the things I immediately turned to was written communication, emails and text messages, that sort of thing. And I started to realize that because there was so much pressure to respond quickly, that I was not actually treating people like people when I responded. People would ask me for something, they would get a direct answer back. I started to realize, if I was talking face to face with somebody, I probably wouldn't just gun back an answer. I'd be like, hey, nice to see you. Or that's a really good question. Something that sort of acknowledges them as a human. And then I would answer the question and then I might close with something. And so I actually started to do that. And it's something I still do today. I had to catch myself last week. Somebody said, they requested some information from me. They asked a question and I immediately fired back the response. But then before I hit send, I paused. And I said, let me add a, hey, so-and-so, great to hear from you. And then respond to the question, right? Like these are really small things. It didn't take a ton of extra time, but taking that step back and saying, wait just a minute, how am I coming off here? Is it when this person reads this 12 hours from now, is it going to come off really abruptly? Because they're like, wait, I need some context. And we can think about, when was the last time I talked to this person? Is this the first time I'm hearing from them, in 6 months? Well, let's acknowledge that. Say, hey, it's been a while. This doesn't take a lot of extra time to do.
Mm. Yeah, it is amazing how it's just kind of adding a few words. It really only takes a few seconds, and yet it can really change the whole tenor of the interaction. And the irony is that if we don't take the time to do that, more likely than not, the other person is going to be having this whole internal dialogue like, wait, how come that I'm not being acknowledged? Is she mad at me? Did I do something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
So they're not even really able to fully engage with the conversation. So it reduces, to your point about the quality of the interaction if we don't take the time to kind of frame it up first. So we have a question that Alana just submitted here. And again, for everyone, please feel free to post your questions. Any tips for solopreneurs and how to fulfill social connection? Asking for a friend.
I'm so glad you asked, because people would assume that when you go from an organization to solopreneurship, which I did in 2021, that all of a sudden the social interaction is going to be gone. And yes, we have to be more intentional about building positive relationships, but I've never had a richer and more thriving social life, even though for the past 5 months I've been confined to my home nursing an injury. I have tons of connections with people that have been really supportive and meaningful to me. And that's because I've invested the time and, making sure I have those 30-minute, I do a lot of walking calls, as you know, Laura, because we've been on a lot of those together, where we'll just go for a walk together on the phone and just catch up. And I make time for those in my schedule. I also do things like I identify a few people. I can't do probably more than 4 or 5, but I identify a few people who have expressed an interest in understanding my perspective and some of my experience. And I formed mentoring relationships with them. Mentoring relationships are all about just taking an active interest in someone else's growth and success. And all of us have something that we offer to other people. It's not always about, well, I'm an expert or I'm not an expert. It can be, I've been in this field a little longer than you have. I've been in this organization a little longer than you have. I have an experience maybe you don't have that can help you. And just taking an active interest in others is one way to do that as well. And so I've just been open to mentoring opportunities, and I meet with 4 or 5 different women monthly or quarterly, depending on their preference. And we just have conversations about how things are going for them. So we can do this with some intention.
And we have another question that came in from Penny here. Do you find things have shifted since COVID and that people are not doing as many social activities with work people, i.e. drinks after work, that make building connections more difficult? And Penny, thank you so much for your question.
Yeah, yes. We saw a huge increase in all of these virtual social hours and then now in-person social hours. And I think people started to feel like, I'm not getting anything out of these because they're just meeting that structural connection. It's not really attending to the depth of interactions and the quality interactions that people want. And so they're like, this is just another obligation that my work is asking of me, and it's not resulting in giving me value. Now, when we create opportunities for people to actually connect in smaller groups, able to have conversations about something other than work in meaningful ways, and there are a lot of ways organizations can set up the atmosphere to do that. It helps people to feel like, well, wait just a minute, I got value from this interaction with other people. I'm more likely to return to work. I'm more likely to participate next time. But these huge arena events where, let's get 50 people together and all have a happy hour at the same time, like that's not meaningful connection. And so, of course, people are going to, after a while, say, I don't need this in my life. I want to connect with people in a real and authentic way. And that means smaller groups of people. It means let's have a conversation about something other than this, this facade we have to put on for one another about how everything's going fine when it might not be.
I think also what you're talking about, these happy hours and free food and things like that, is also part of the whole matrix of bringing people back to the office, and this faulty thinking that if we just have a few incentives like that, that it's going to make people excited to come back. But really, we have to tap into what actually matters most, ensuring that people are coming back to the office for good reason. I want to just highlight here, we've got a comment that just came in here. I hope it's okay if I mention that Jessica's book, Reimagining Workplace Wellbeing, is available in the US at the Hi-Ho bookstore. And sales there help support independent bookstores. So thank you very much for that comment. So Jess, we're coming to the end of our time here together. And I was wondering if you could share with the listeners the top 3 takeaways that you would like them to come away with.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the plug for independent bookstores. I'm going to give a plug to Powell Books. Yay. Also can find me there. So top 3 takeaways. 1, developing stronger social connections at work is important. It's something that we need to lean into. And if we're finding that we are experiencing a lack of fulfillment or feeling disengaged from our job, lean into your relationships because it will make a difference. And I say that speaking from experience. 2nd, develop strong social connections. Doing that means paying attention to these 3 aspects. It's not just about creating more opportunities, but making sure that we are curating those opportunities so that we're actually focused on quality interactions with one another. And I give a lot of examples on how to do that in my book. And then finally, there are many positive practices that leaders and organizations can put into place to support higher quality social connections. If you're looking for free resources, you can go to my website because I have a free resources tab, and you can scroll down and look for the Foundation for Social Connection. They actually have a fantastic report, as does the Surgeon General, on how we can be doing this better at work.
And 3 takeaways. A, it matters. It's important.
Yeah.
And that, to think about paying attention to those 3 aspects that you talk about: structural, functional, and quality. And then finally, that organizations really can make a difference. And what would you say, Jess, is the top thing that organizations can do to actually make a difference in social connections for people?
I think one of the things that I see that is a challenge, whether you're working in person or not, is just the pressure cooker demand of this onslaught of one thing after another all day long. Organizations need to create space. We all need to create space, that breath, that pause that allows us to lean back from our screen and say, oh, let me actually say hi to this person. Let me greet them by name. Let's make sure that when we bring people back to the office, that there are spaces, and it's not just physical space, but mental space for people to connect with each other in ways that go outside of a task at hand. I was just talking with my husband yesterday because he spent the full day in office up in Santa Clara yesterday. And I said, what value did you get out of that? What did your organization do to make that a quality experience for you? And he said, I bumped into somebody I would never have interacted with if I hadn't gone into the office because we didn't have a meeting scheduled. We just bumped into each other at work. Google calls this casual collisions. We need to make space for those casual collisions to happen. And when people are running from one thing to another all day long, they don't even have time to do that.
Yeah, it's funny, as a former teacher, it's the passing time between classes.
Mhm.
And we need to have that passing time in our meeting time. And certainly when we shifted to virtual, that passing time was really taken away. So we weren't able to have those casual collisions as you talk about. So just tell us how we can stay in touch with you.
Yeah, the number one way to follow me is on LinkedIn. I do pay attention to LinkedIn. If you do reach out to me, direct message me. That's the best way to get my attention. And then I do have a comment form on my website. So if you're out there and want to connect with me and follow, right now I don't have a newsletter, but I will be rolling one out eventually. So feel free to sign up for communications from me. And when I have new resources available to share, I'll let you know via that.
So Jessica, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. You are, in fact, our final guest of the year. We will be reconvening on January 24th. Our guest is actually a writer, a journalist by the name of Adam Shandler. His most recent book, Drive Through Dreams, and it's about the inextricable link between fast food industry and American life. He's a former staff writer with The Atlantic. So really looking forward to having him as a guest. So in the meantime, happy holidays, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for this fabulous conversation with Jessica. Jessica, thank you so much for being a guest and talking about this incredibly important topic of social connections. We'll see you all in January. Thanks again, Jess.
Thanks so much.